The ministry reaches out to thousands of disabled people, providing help for their disabilities. But more importantly, it provides a means to share the good news of the gospel. At the core of the ministry is the wheelchair distribution, like this one, which recently took place in Lima. Over 300 wheelchairs collected in the United States had been shipped to Peru and stored in a warehouse. On the day before the distribution, Judy and her staff loaded the chairs into trucks and transported them to a local church where the event was to be hosted. An impressive number of volunteers, many of whom were disabled themselves, helped to unload the trucks and unpack the wheelchairs from their shipping containers. Each of the 300 chairs had to be reassembled and then cleaned. When they were complete, they were sorted according to size and type. Hundreds of Bibles were prepared to pass out to the wheelchair recipients. Volunteers and team members alike joined together to pray for God to bless their efforts and that the harvest would be plentiful. The wheelchair stood in silent anticipation of the activity tomorrow would bring. The disabled arrived literally by the busload as volunteers waited to greet them. Most of the wheelchair recipients had to be carried into the distribution. Many have been bedridden for years because they have had no means of mobility, that is, before now. The overwhelming need being fulfilled was apparent as the recipients anxiously lined up to register for their new wheelchairs. After signing an agreement to return the chair when it was no longer needed, they were taken to a reception area to wait their turn to be fitted. Here they were befriended by members of Judy's missionary team, whose job it was to walk them through the various stages of the distribution. For many of the recipients, it was a rare act of kindness in a world that had virtually abandoned them. The actual fitting was a process that could take just a few minutes or as long as 9 hours. It required the expertise of one of the physical therapists who were also part of Judy's team. These dedicated professionals worked diligently to make sure that each recipient got just the right wheelchair to fulfill his or her special needs. Once these needs were established and the wheelchair was selected, it was often necessary to perform on-the-spot adjustments. This was the responsibility of one of several mechanics who were also part of the missionary team. They were masters of improvisation, using available resources to customize the wheelchairs, making whatever alterations were necessary. Of supreme importance to each stage of this operation were the local volunteers, or friends as they were called. They stayed close by their recipients, offering love and support during what was sometimes a lengthy ordeal. This assortment of nationals and missionaries worked side by side to fit over 300 wheelchairs in just a few days. It was an impressive accomplishment. Many of the wheelchair recipients could not make it to the distribution, so Judy and her team made house calls, this time to a poor family in the heart of Lima, where they provided a greatly needed wheelchair to a man who had been bedridden for years. His immobility required the constant care of his daughter, and he could only go outside if carried. The love and attention given each wheelchair recipient was evident as these two physical therapists worked tenderly for hours, making sure the new wheelchair fit just right. After the fitting, they shared the good news of Christ with the men, who accepted the gospel with joy and happiness.
See? He said it's okay.
House calls are a shining example of how Judy's ministry reaches out to the physical and spiritual needs of the disabled community. Back at the distribution, the disabled and their families are trained how to use their wheelchairs or walkers and how to manage things like stairs and curbs. They then enter the most important stage of Judy's outreach. Each of the disabled people received a Bible in their own language, and then were ushered into one of 4 evangelism rooms. Here the entire family heard the gospel, presented one-on-one by local pastors and lay people. In all, almost 350 received Christ during this week. Of significance is the fact that over 200 of these were family members of the disabled.
Todo lo puedo en Cristo que me fortalece. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.